I'm Rick Munn. This is No Risk, No Reward Media, and I'm very happy to be joined again, maybe for the fourth, maybe the fifth time on this channel by the one and only John Waters. For the uninitiated out there, John is a writer, he's an author, he's a thinker, he's a talker, and he seems like a decent spud. John, how you doing?
Hello, Rick. Nice to be with you again.
Yeah, indeed. Last time we spoke was just before St. Patrick's Day. So obviously, again, the old saying, there's a lot of water has passed under the bridge since then, both what's going on in society and what's going on with you. You have penned another tome that's now available to buy on Amazon, and the link for this will be in the description box underneath this video. John Waters, The Abolition of Reality, the first draft of the end of history. That's quite a mouthful. How did you come up with that title?
Well, the abolition of reality has multiple layers, some of which I'm not even sure I can adequately explain or explicate. It's got to do with the fact that the period we've been living through for the last 5 years has really been really a deliberate attempt to rupture our sense of where we were, who we were, the nature of our countries, our nations, our humanity, our spirituality, everything. So it's like a cleaver coming down on the connections, the wires that linked us to the past and to each other and to culture and all those things. That's one aspect of it. There's others. The end of the first draft of the end of history, the way I explain that is to say to people, well, all journalism, we used to say that journalism was the first draft of history, which is a good enough description of it, very good description of it, actually. And this what's in this book is really, most of it, not all of it, but most of it is material that I was writing from late 2020 to the present about what was going on. There's essays that I did for Substack, and most of them are pretty much as they were. I only tweaked them for coherence here and there. But there's a couple of them that are completely rewritten near the end because I felt I needed to write the ending wasn't, I don't know what you would say, final, not final, but it wasn't really a conclusion that I could sort of leave the book down and that a reader could leave it down and say, okay, that's that. I understand that. So the first draft of the end of history, it's not necessarily saying that it's all over. What it's saying is that right now, the way things look, the way things stand, it's looking pretty bad. They look like they might succeed. And the only way that we can make sure they don't is to start understanding, waking up, as we used to say. So one of the reasons, or one of the main reasons I wrote this book was to give people a sense of that they could in one place find an account of the deep meanings of what was happening, rather than just the chronology of facts about whatever, the COVID period or whatever. It's actually about all kinds of aspects, groupthink, propaganda, the use of fake money as an instrument, of control, all kinds of things. The meaning of money, there's a whole lot of different essays which are all converging on what's happening at a level that you won't read in the newspapers because they're paid not to put it in. And the end of history then is, there's a resonance there with Fukuyama's book from, I think, 1992, The End of History and the Last Man. He called the end of history on the basis that the Berlin Wall had come down, and that was the end of communism, socialism. There was now only one ideology, and we were therefore going into the future in like a certain utopian spirit, and it was all pretty much, laid out before us. I never bought that. I don't buy it now, but we do face, and another aspect of it as well, is which I have a very strong sense of, is pseudo-reality that they're building. I've written an awful lot about that, and there's a lot about this in the book, that they've been building all around us like something like a stage set every day for the last 5 years, which is completely false. My former profession are the architects and the plasterers and the carpenters who are building this every day. It's pseudo-reality. It's basically lies. And That's kind of another aspect of it, like that reality has been not so much terminated as obscured, hidden away from us.
Yeah.
And so it's all the feelings also that go with that, the sense of trying to figure out what's what and who's who and how do they do this, and can they really be thinking this? Can they really know what they're doing? Is it possible for human beings to do this? These kind of questions, I'm struggling with these all the time in the book, things that people that we ponder. You and I have talked about these over the last couple of years, really, in the interviews we've been doing, and that's something that still to this day I'm every day I talk to people in the street or in cafes or whatever, and I said, do you know what goes on in their minds? You know, I look into the eyes of Micheál Martin on TV, and I ask, does he know what he's doing? Because I do. And I know that if he knows what he's doing, he's a deeply evil man.
Yeah.
But maybe he doesn't.
You know, you said something and I jotted it down there. You maybe weren't even aware of what you'd said or even your choice of words, right? But you were talking about specifically from March 2020 onwards, okay?
Yeah.
Madness descended upon the world. At least we were trying to figure out how things got the way they did, why people accepted what they did, and what the motivation was deep down inside for what it was. And you said there, you said this, you said it was like they were trying to bring a cleaver down on the wires of what held us to our past, our cultural identity, our freedom, our liberties, etc. Now, the word cleaver and the word wires is what jumped out at me, right? Because you could have said, they were trying to, take a pair of scissors to the string that kept us to what we once were. I don't know if you were conscious when you said those words, but a cleaver is a big, heavy, sharp, metallic weapon. And a wire, you mentioned wires as well. So the thing that's really holding us to what we were, it's not string, it's not cotton, it's not a little piece of rope. It's almost like wire, steel wire, very hard to break unless you take a big, heavy, metallic implement, sharp edged, and bring it down with great force on that wire.
Yeah.
That's the only way to sever. And maybe that's why there was what I would look upon as an assault on us, on our freedoms, on our minds, on everything. That's what was needed to really cut those ties and allow them to continue to work on us.
That's so true, and because that's about violence. It's about
Mm-hmm.
violence, and this is something that we need to understand. And I've recently been writing up aspects of the book for an American magazine, and drawing out this particular theme. But it's there in the book as well, which is this question which has often been asked in the last 5 years. You know, which is this most like, Huxley, Brave New World, or
Mm-hmm.
Orwell, 1984? And Huxley, Brave New World was a, a book about a novel about really a society that was kind of oppressed by being cosseted, by being, given drugs and sex and all those things in order to kind of, distract people and dull them and lull them into a sense of complacency and couldn't care less. Whereas Orwell's thing is violence, and he says, that line in the book where he says about, that the future of humanity, where O'Brien says to Winston Smith, he says, is, a boot coming
Mm-hmm.
down upon a human face
Mm-hmm.
forever,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's like the kind of, when you put that question to people, generally they tend to go for Huxley. They say, no, the kind of society we have now is more like Huxley's than it is like Orwell's. And I question that, because you see, Huxley's thing, yeah, for sure, and we're getting all that, and they're doing that. But behind it all is the boot,
Mm-hmm.
or if you prefer, the iron fist in the
Velvet
velvet
glove.
Huxleyan
Yeah.
glove, the Orwellian fist. It's there all the time, because if you don't play ball, we found out what they do. We saw it in 2020, people being dragged out of buses and trains, and brutalized and beaten with batons because they said, no, we have a free society. We want to keep it. and being treated like criminals. As you know, myself, I was,
Hmm.
dragged into court for going, what, more than 2 kilometers from your home without a good reason. A good reason? I had lots of good reasons, but they weren't the reasons that they wanted to hear.
Yes.
And see, and what made it all so incomprehensible was that nobody seemed to understand it, or so many people didn't seem to understand it. But I, this is violence. Like this is like once the threat of violence is present, you have a violent society.
Hmm.
The state has a monopoly on licensed force, coercion, and ultimately on violence. And once it shows that it is prepared to use that against its own people for interests which have nothing to do with the good of the people, but which are dictated from above, then you are into totalitarianism. And that's what we have now. And there's no glossing that over. That's what it is. And that cleaver is an attempt to destroy the memories of people, destroy the patriotism,
Hmm.
the affection for their land, for their history, for their culture. All of that is it's a program of destruction, Rick.
And
Which
it has to be for it to be effective, it has to be brutal, it has to be very focused, because this culture, this tradition's going back thousands and thousands of years
yeah,
among a people on a little island, a little blob in the Atlantic Ocean, with nothing between us and North America, okay, living very happily most of the time and most of the places, existing and just loving the way of life, loving our life here, complaining about when it's too rainy or when the temperature gets to 20 degrees C. We all think we're dying in the heat. We have really, that's the extent of most people's grumbles about life in Ireland. At least it was that way for a very, very long time. Now, if you were to take a poll to say, what are the major things affecting, what you think are affecting Ireland at the minute, the weather would not be one of them.
no, no. No, but at the same time, Rick, what you would get would be a mixed message because the level of propaganda that's been pumped into the ether of our society
Uh-huh.
for the last 5 years in
Uh-huh.
particular, going back before that, of course, but really with knobs on since
Yeah.
2020,
Yeah.
that we've been washed every minute of every day with lies about what reality means, what values we should aspire to, who we are, who we were, who we can be. The very definition of Irishness is being pulverized in front of our eyes. That you don't have to be Irish now to be Irish. Anybody can be Irish. You can come off a plane and 5 minutes later you're Irish.
Uh-huh.
You know, this is like to call this gaslighting. I mean, gaslighting is a word I've talked about. It's in the book as well. I mean, it's a very strange word, because it comes from a movie from way back, whatever, 40, 50 years ago, about somebody who's trying to fool his wife into believing that she's going mad. And it's a very strange word because it has to do not with the actual condition, but with the idea that he's using the gaslight outside, and he's saying, "Is it dimming? Is it?" And then he's saying, "No, no, it's this." And so it's a strange word because it has no connection immediately, rationally, with the condition, but people use it all the time.
Uh-huh.
And it's a word. It's probably if you could do a survey of it, it's probably the most used new word
Yeah.
of the last decade. And
As is, by the way, dystopian,
yes,
Orwellian. So if you were having a conversation with someone, I'm sorry to cut across you, but that's what you describe in a way when you're talking about this book that you've just written, okay? And this is from the preview or the blurb on Amazon, for example. This book, as in your book, may become to the reality of the past 5 years what Winston Smith's diary proposed it might be in the fictional world of 1984. It is intended, first of all, as a permanent record of the events only few comprehended, their meanings and significance, a book, as Winston said, for the future, for the unborn. So there's words now that people are using that they would never have used in normal conversation 5 years ago, like, or you would never have described Ireland as Orwellian,
oh no, no,
dystopian, talked about mis and disinformation, talked about is it more Huxley or is it more Orwell? That wouldn't have
No,
been in a conversation 5 years ago, but here we are. More and more
no,
people are
that's
now
right.
talking that way.
That's right, Rick. Sometimes you kind of catch yourself and you kind of want to pinch yourself and think, is this real? Did any of this actually happen? It couldn't have, because the country I had lived in up to that point for, nearly 65 years, that was alien, completely alien. I mean, we had 1984, the year. It was a very peaceful, beautiful year in Ireland. There was nothing like, and Orwell was like fiction. It was an interesting story, that might conceivably happen in some parallel world.
Mhm.
Not here. Impossible. 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 Because not alone had we all of these charters and conventions and constitution and so on and so on, but we had a culture that was so easygoing and so humorous that it would be such a thing would be laughed off the stage within 10 minutes. Like our grandparents would have just laughed at all this stuff. They would have laughed at the idea of cocooning because
Yeah.
of a head cold.
Yeah.
Like they would just have laughed at the idea. What, you're having a laugh? Like you want us to not go down the road to talk to each other? You don't want us to go? No, that's go take a run and jump.
Or your wife's dying. Have an iPad and say goodbye.
Yes,
Right?
yes. You can look in the window at your mother.
Yeah. But you can't go to the funeral if she dies.
Yeah.
Right?
You
Like,
see, this is
you
no.
see on that topic, you see on that note, right? Because you mentioned is it Orwell, is it Huxley, and you mentioned the violence of Orwell, the jackboot stamping on a human face for the rest of eternity. That's the vision of the future. Now, if you look outside your window today, you won't see jackbooted stormtroopers stomping on people's faces. You won't physically see that right now, probably where you live. However, the delivery was done in a more subtle way. So, to say, too, for example, every place of worship in Ireland is to be shut down. There will be no more mass, no more communion, no more pastoral visits, no more religious fellowship if you practice any religion, whatever it happened to be. It could have been a mosque, it could have been a chapel, it could have been a free Presbyterian church, or it could have been a whatever. They were all closed down. You mentioned about getting arrested and having to explain why you went more than 2 kilometers from your house, or why you were out more than once a day exercising for more than an hour and not picking up essentials, why you were wanting to access a dying relative in a nursing home, for example. Now, no shots were fired, John. No shots were fired, okay? But people just simply complied under maybe the threat of being ostracized, of being othered by the majority of people that were going along with what was being done. And is that not the beauty of this, that you would look out your window, you wouldn't see attack helicopters, you wouldn't see stormtroopers with dogs, you wouldn't see people really being bashed into submission. They willfully complied.
Well, that's another aspect of it. But in fact, you would. I mean,
It
if you
did
remember,
happen. I get you.
if
It
you
did happen.
remember all those yellow vest
Yes.
jackets of police everywhere you went. I remember when myself and Jim O'Doherty took our legal challenge, our constitutional challenge to the High Court. The entire place was like ringed off. It was a ring of steel. Like there were literally hundreds of police officers, police cars, to close down the court for two people going in with a bunch of papers to ask a couple of questions of a judge, right? This was treated like it was if it was like an assassination had just occurred down the street, of a major political figure, and they had closed down the area. Like, but yes, so, and the other thing I would say about that, of course, but the thing is, Rick, the memory of that, the impression of that,
Yeah.
remains in the consciousness of our
Yes.
people.
Yes.
It's like a very abusive relationship.
Mhm.
It doesn't need a lot of violence to make the person, the victim, afraid.
And they don't forget.
The raised voice is enough. The raised voice is enough, because that says fist.
I
That
suppose
says boot.
your example actually what I was trying to get at was the majority of people
Oh
simply
yeah,
comply. So, for example, in your case, you were higher profile, maybe being made an example of, as if to say, if you're watching John Waters, this could be you. If you step 2 kilometers or 5 kilometers
yeah,
outside of your deep, area of movement, this could be you. So
yes.
stay in your
Well,
place and be a good citizen.
but what you've said is also true, Rick, here as well, in the context that there's something unique about this whole thing, where it was able to recruit the majority of the population as allies in this mission to subdue the whole population. Because I found that. I mean, I couldn't walk down the street. I couldn't go. There was a certain cafe near me now. It's closed now, and they were very decent people. They never blinked when I never went in with a mask. I never wore a mask, and they never asked me to. Uh, and but some of the customers, when they would see me, would start ranting at me, shouting at me, or calling me names, abusing me. Right? Like nobody had. There was no. Like he could have stayed at home if he was so scared of dying. Right? But he was coming out, and he just had. He felt that he entitled by the government's position
Mm-hmm.
and a behavior to abuse me because I decided I want to come out. I don't think I'm going to die. I want a cup of coffee. If you don't mind, would you shut your stupid mouth and go somewhere else? I won't be going anywhere. I'm here. This is a free country, at least in my head, even if no longer in reality. And here we are again,
Imagine
the
you saying
abolition
that
of
too.
reality.
Imagine you saying that too 5 years ago. Ireland's a free country, but only in my head. Do
Yeah.
you ever foreseen yourself saying that?
No, exactly. Exactly. And you see, the thing about it is, Rick, that even today, a beautiful sunny day, I look out my window here, right? And I remember a time when I looked out that window 5 years ago, and there was this checkpoint outside it, and I could hear the voices, the guards asking people, some woman with her children, "Where are you going?" "Well, we're just going to the shop." "So yeah, what are you going to buy?" You know, like, come on.
I know. Do you really need a new jumper for your child? Is
Yeah,
that an essential item? Are you going to pick up medication? No, I just want to buy some trainers for my son. No, you can't do that. Remember, they put them behind cellophane and
yeah,
wheels. They actually put plastic sheets above
yeah,
things that the government deemed to be non-essential items. Can I ask you a question, by the way? Just you mentioned looking out your window. Your Substack page, you have a great title of a weekly thing you do called it's the Diary of a Dissenter, the week from my window, which I think is a fantastic name. Is it literally about you staring out that window while you were writing
not
all
only
that?
that window, but yes, literally and
Yeah.
metaphorically. I mean, it's literally whatever window I'm looking out. But this is the window I look out probably more than any other window, and it can be very educational to see a lot of
Hmm.
things because I'm looking over a green area where there's always lots of visitors, particularly when there's sunshine, and you can get a good idea of the demographic of the country from it for any day of the week, and so on. But yeah, you see, I wanted in the diary, I want what I want, and the diaries aren't in this book actually, but because these are other books I hope to publish in the future, and they're actually in some ways even closer to the knuckle light than these essays, because they're highly personal, and I hope I might have to be dead before they get out, like, but I will arrange for that. Don't worry. So, like, yeah, I see it as to me, the the only way you can talk about this is not scientifically or not, politically or ideologically. You can only talk subjectively,
Hmm.
because I have spent most of the last 5 years wrestling in my head with these questions. What is going on in the head of Leo Varadkar? How can somebody who claimed to be a Democrat, who came into Irish politics and claimed to be democratic, he never claimed to love Ireland, by the way, not once. So I don't think, we can't accuse him of that.
Hmm.
But, and I look at Martin, who grew up to Irish politics and seemed to be a normal kind of political person, a bit of a gobshite, but, not the worst, Now he is the worst. There's no doubt about it. Because he's doing things and saying things that amount, because he has power
Hmm.
and administrative power anyway, that amount to the termination of Ireland as a going concern. The amount, in fact, I would say virtually to what his masters want to achieve in the vacant possession of Ireland. And by that I mean that the vacant possession of the territory of Ireland without anybody on that island at that moment who has any love for it as a country, as a history, as a culture, as a place, as a home. You will have all strangers walking about, and it will be their place. And everybody else will have to stay in their houses. Anybody who has any residual patriotic sentiment better stay in and keep their mouth shut.
You see, on that, this kind of segues in beautifully with another sort of observation I made about your book cover, your window, and the future. It's all tying in together. If you haven't seen this book, check out the link below. Go on to Amazon, look at it. I'm looking now at your book cover. All right. So there's it there. This is my technology. I don't use a second computer anyway. I'm looking at it, right? And I commented to you before we started recording this. I love the title because it reminded me like of a metal album from back in the day, The Abolition of Reality. That sounds absolutely metal, right? And then I looked at the cover. And again, it's you stirring out. Again, maybe this is subliminal or symbolic, but it's you stirring out. And in the background, it looks like beautiful rolling hills and fields of Ireland. Beautiful. But there's some storm clouds in the sky. And there's a mirror type portal in front of you. And where the green grass should be, it's this purpley, like a bruise almost. Look at it. It looks like a bruise, a nasty bruise. When you get hit real hard, it goes all nasty and purple and dark, dark blue before it starts to become like a yellowy brown. Looks like a bruise. There's fire in the background. It reminds me of the opening scene of Apocalypse Now, when Willard's in the hotel room and they're napalming the jungle. There's flames. And then there's you. You're in the middle of all this. And the back of your head is visible as you're looking through this portal. But as you look at it, I'm looking at your face here, and I don't know if you asked for this or I don't know if you commissioned it this way or whoever did it, but you look really forlorn and hollow and I don't know, like you just like had most of your soul sucked out as you stare at this apocalyptic scene.
Yeah,
Am
yeah.
I reading too much into it?
No, well, not no, you're not at all. I mean, there's different. I mean, I saw what's in that portal or a mirror, if you like. It's the same scene, but it's actually turned into hell.
Yeah.
Right now, the pictures actually it was my wife took those pictures, Rita, and we had to match them up the rear view and the other one, and the pic and I mean I chose that one with my face the way it is. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't say that's me looking like that. I just said no, that's the one. The other way you do in journalism, you just the editor just looks at the picture. He doesn't say I like that one because he just says that's the one.
Yeah,
and this was the one. My face, my country, in ruins, beyond ruins, and I'm looking at it now, and this is the future for my child and her child and her children. In the time comes, if they're still allowed to be here on this beautiful island. This is the enormity of it, Rick, and all of it goes back to that word COVID. COVID is not about COVID. COVID is about all of this,
everything, all of the above.
Yes.
On that picture, right? Allow me to speak freely here. So, I knew I was going to talk to you this morning, was mulling over a lot of stuff that I've been seeing and stuff that I've been observing recently. And last Friday night, I had the car, I had some time, so I decided to drive down to County Monaghan, to Carrickmacross, where they were holding a public demonstration about landlords who were allowing buildings to be used as iPass centres, and the town is being effectively destroyed because of greedy landlords and government policies and people flooding into the area and crime going up and people being unsettled, right? So that's the background. But as I was driving down there, the most beautiful day I could not have picked. It was sun splitting the sky. It was a beautiful breeze. The traffic was light. It was a joy to drive down from through Belfast down past Newry, down towards Dundalk, and then cut across into Monaghan. I'd never been there before. It was just beautiful. I like rural areas. It was beautiful. And then I arrived in Carrickmacross, and it looked like an absolutely beautiful spot. It is a beautiful spot. A little village town, if you want to call it that, 6,000 people. Glorious night. Kids out playing. Everybody seemed to be at peace. But, it's sort of set against the backdrop. Well, there's going to be a public gathering here because the locals are feeling threatened. They're feeling like their town is being destroyed. They're feeling like if something's not done, it's going to end up like hell. And in a strange way, they were seeing the hellish vision that you're looking at on your book cover, but I was seeing the beautiful countryside. But it's not until you go into it and you start to hear what people are saying and you hear their testimonies of their lived experience in that place over a period of years that the reality really hits you. And then you look around, John, and there's 1,000 people gathered in a town of 5,000. That's I would say 20% of the population were there that night peacefully. Old women, old men, babies, middle-aged, you name it. There were no thugs. Nobody was drinking. There were no right-wing extremists. Nobody was chanting and screaming and wanting destruction of property. Concerned Irish people watching and witnessing and experience their heart being ripped out of their town. And dare I say it, if I could have snapshotted their faces on a bad day, it would have probably looked like your face in that book cover, The Abolition of Reality. And it's happening
Yeah,
all over the place now.
yeah. You made a slight slip of the tongue there, Rick, in that last sentence where you said their heart being ripped out of their town. And that's exactly right.
Yeah,
It is their heart.
it
Their
is.
place is their heart. It's their heart and their heart. And we live in a time when those who rule, the authorities without authority, I call them sometimes, they don't care about the people's heart or their heart. They have no care for the people. They have no care for the country. They have no care for anything except their orders. Orders must be obeyed at all times without question.
Mm.
That's what they have a care for. They are carrying out the diktats of people who have no ambition but to destroy this country for all time. And they're doing it. And they're doing it in every day. You see, what happens is here, Rick, you see it yourself. Every so often they make some kind of concession or say, well, we're going to start vetting them now, or we're going to do this, or oh, we exported 3 people last week, so now you should, we deported them, so now you should, and we had like 30 guards on the plane with them, and, we brought them all back at your expense, back to where they came from, but they'll be back, tomorrow week again by a circuitous route. We know that. And we know that, there, for every one that goes back, there's 1,000 who are just let off to get lost. Now, this is the thing, like that, people, this is terminal. There's no question about it. Sometimes we get into arguments about, you hear the poor people out in the countryside saying, well, they try to avoid the elephant in the elevator, by saying, look, we only got one doctor, and we lost our Garda station, and blah blah. That's the wrong argument. The argument is, this is our town. We built it. You, the government, had nothing to do with it. It is not yours to destroy. It is not yours to dispose of. Get the hell out and take your so-called police force with you.
Mm. And you talk about it's not their time to decide. Again, the government have this almost a mantra, at least with some areas, to say a community does not have a veto on who goes into that community,
Well, you see,
except, of course, if it's D4.
Well, of course, D4, we have to be mindful of that. But you see, there's a scintilla of truth. You see, it's the old trick of propaganda. There's always a scintilla of truth. Of course, it is true to say that in any given town, if a family come from any place in the world and they want to live in the town because maybe one of the parents has a job, for a period, or even they want to stay, the people have no right to say, no, we don't want your sort around here. That would be wrong, okay? Yeah. But that's one family. or even say 3 families. But 500 men coming to a town of 175 people,
Yep.
to a village, that's not the same thing, by the
No,
way. And
it's not. It's
stop trying to
not.
treat us like idiots.
And that's the case in point. I was an outsider, right? When I arrived, but I was made to feel very welcome because I
Yes.
wasn't loitering around the ATM machines, intimidating old women, or standing at the kids' play park, or following people up and down the street, or as one person said, spitting seeds incessantly along the length and breadth of the main street. Okay,
Yeah.
or trying, as one woman, there was a town hall meeting held the following Tuesday night by the local Sinn Féin. I think he was an MEP, but he held court in a hotel or a venue, and there was 25 to 30 people giving brutal testimonies. One woman said, "I think my brother had a stroke last year. He's now in a sheltered accommodation. There's a family have moved in beside. They're always trying to get the keypad access to allow them access into his home. The backs of the houses are turned into like ghetto type alleyways. Parents won't let their kids walk from the chapel down to home. It's only a 2 minute walk. Asking for CCTV to be put up in kids' playgrounds. That was never the case two to
No.
3 to 4 to 5 years ago. And it's not because Mr. Waters, the upstanding gentleman, and his wife and his daughter have moved into the area. No, it's not about decent, upstanding people coming in there. Quite the opposite.
No, it's an invasion. Like you see, you know what's going on in these contexts always, Rick, by the words they try to make illegal, the words they try to ban. And the words they're most anxious to ban here are invasion and replacement.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, we can conclude, and there's loads of evidence of it, there's no other explanation for it than that this is an invasion of young men coming into our country. They have no purpose here. They have no reason to be here. They're not refugees. It's a lie. And they're no use to our country. Far from it. Now here I am doing the thing that I'm telling people not to do, which is argue with ridiculous arguments. We argue against the nonsense that is put forward to gaslight you and to make you drive you insane. I always say don't argue it. But in order to make the point, sometimes you have to say how ludicrous it is. Because there are still people out there who actually still believe it. They believe in this notion of compassion and tolerance and, all this nonsense that is put about, not just by politicians, but by clerics, by priests and bishops. They're the worst offenders in some respects because they are bolstering a massive lie that is destroying the people they are here to serve.
And Martin, you talked about Micheál Martin as well. When he was pressed on this, if you want to call it being pressed, I think he did a News Talk interview one time, and they were asking him, how can we take all these people in? How can we do that when we're not building enough homes for the Irish people, let alone everybody that's coming in? And here he looked at the interview with this incredulous look, that sucking lemons look that he had. He's either constipated or sucking a lemon. He says, "Where's your humanity? Where's your humanity? Where's your humanity?" Again, twisting it around to say that this is, if you don't do this, if you don't agree to this, you're inhuman. If you don't agree to this, where's your compassion? Where's your humanity? What an absurd statement to come from him.
It's a terrible irony, Rick, that in a culture which has shucked off all of its virtually ostensible religious beliefs, and treated the church with complete contempt for quite a long time. In some respects, deserved. It has to be said. There's merit, and there are reasons, and I'm not disputing that. But the one thing that seems to survive is this pseudo idea that Jesus wanted us all to give up everything to somebody else. That having anything was some kind of crime. Therefore, you had to give it to somebody else. Now, I say to people, okay, that's your interpretation of what Jesus was saying. So he was saying that you had to give everything you have away to somebody else. Okay, let's now think about this somebody else that you have given everything to. What should they be doing? Mm-hmm. Oh, I know. They should give it back to you because you have nothing, right? Mm-hmm. How long is this seesaw going to go on? This is the nonsense that they spout and that bishops spout. And indeed, to be honest with you, from what we know of him so far, Pope Leo XIV spouts. Mm-hmm. I'm leaving the gate open for a few weeks to see what he's going to say. I think he may have actually, he may surprise us. I hope he does. But so far, he's saying ludicrous things about mass migration. He doesn't seem to understand what's happening in the world. And that's a serious matter for somebody at such an elevated position.
Well, don't forget, he lives in a walled city, doesn't he? He lives in a walled country. Talk about opposing Trump building a wall. Sure, Vatican City is a country in and of
Well,
itself with
exactly.
a bloody big wall around it. And
He,
if I'm not mistaken, the last pope was very against having homeless people
oh,
soiling the courtyards.
he went down to he went across to the United States. He went down to the Mexican border and he made a speech there saying bridges, not walls. And then he got on a plane and he went back to his walled city in Rome.
And kicked all the riffraff out. You
Yeah,
can't be having these
he
people.
slapped a couple of old ladies on the way in.
Slapped a couple of grannies. The hypocrisy, the rank
Yeah,
hypocrisy of it all, John.
honestly, Rick, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. And
It's good to laugh, but listen, we shouldn't really laugh. But if we don't retain some humor in all of this and see some funny side in some of it, that's another thing. If they can stop us from joking and they can take the crack away from us and they can remove our humor, then our heads, I believe, really would go
well,
down,
then,
John.
ultimately, Rick, that's the purpose of the hate speech laws.
Yeah.
Because you'll have to stop every time you think of a thought and you have to arrest it. You have to put the brakes on it and then you have to put the handbrake on it and you have to put it into gear, out of gear, into neutral. And then you have to stand there for a while looking at it and say, now, what are the ramifications of saying that, of making that joke? Maybe I better just keep my mouth shut. And that's what they want.
Yeah.
And I hear the latest now is that the European Union is now saying it's going to fine us if we don't introduce this appalling legislation within 2 months. Well, we'll see what happens. But, I think it's coming very close to time when we told the European Union where to go with itself.
I believe so. And in fact, on that note, that was another argument that was being put up that even if you disagreed with what we're doing on a moral basis, if you were being immoral by denying entry to every Tom, Dick, and Harry that wants to flood into Ireland, we have a legal duty to not turn people away that are international protection, asylum seekers, or people that are coming here allegedly fleeing death and persecution. So, irrespective of morals and humanity, there's a legal obligation there.
Well, it's a funny
That.
thing, Rick. It's a very funny thing. But if you actually look at the stats and the graphs on that, you've seen something very interesting, that Ireland has the greatest per capita intake of foreigners over the last 25 years. And the nearest country to us is actually Spain. And they're at approximately, if not precisely, half of our intake per capita.
Wonder what Vatican City's on, John.
I wonder if they're on it at all.
I wonder if they've taken anyone in.
Well, unless you count Cardinal Sarah, maybe not.
It's one
And
for
the funny thing about it is, Rick, this is the most amazing thing, that Cardinal Sarah, a Guinean, a black African cardinal, a brilliant, 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 brilliant man, says that mass migration is the cancer of the modern era.
That's maybe why he wasn't the next pope.
It is why he wasn't the next, because the other guy stancelled him about a couple of years ago and took him out.
I wanna ask you some questions because I'm not gonna I want to do it. I want to make sure I get this done because bless the people that listen to this channel. I put a post up last night. I said John Waters is coming on. Anything you want me to ask him, leave a comment. So I have some questions here. I'm gonna machine gun them at you. You can bat them back in as much or as little detail as you like. There's maybe 5 or 10 here, so we'll just pepper through them. Okay, is that okay?
Okay.
Right. So first question is from John Long. John Long, thank you very much, John, for the question. Now, he says, given that the system is obviously rigged, political parties and individuals are controlled by NGOs and agencies outside the electoral system, the fact there doesn't look like there's going to be any rebellion or uprising despite large turnouts at marches, as there hasn't been enough terror to ignite what would be required for a rebellion. What, in John's heartfelt opinion, is a genuine step that ordinary people, just normal folk living their lives, he says, Tom and Mary down the road, what steps can ordinary people take that won't see them landed in jail and would hinder the agenda? What can the grassroots grunt level fighters like you and me in this so-called movement do? What can the average person do that won't see them jailed and that won't hinder the agenda?
Well, I can't guarantee the latter because they can modify everything we've seen. There's nothing they can't change to make it possible to jail you for virtually anything now. But to my mind, the most important thing in any democratic context or previously democratic context, which is what we know, post-democratic is what we are, is conversation. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that's missing from our culture. The media is all lies. It's a constant barrage of lies from morning till night. Turn off the media. Everybody should turn off the media. But the other part of that is that communities need to now to start working to create forums for the local community to go once or twice a week, where they can go into rooms for 2 or 3 hours in the evening, have cups of tea and maybe a few digestives, and sit around and start talking about what's really happening in their country and how they really, really feel about it. To me, that sounds like that's literally going back to the foundations. But I think that's where we need to go. I think the movement has basically shot itself in both feet. That's my honest opinion. I am encouraged by the numbers again. But remember, the marches, we had these kind of marches back in 2020 with the yellow vests, and that came to nothing, you know. So, you know, a march is a kind of an incoherent blurt of anger. What we need is people in their country speaking about their lives, speaking about what's happened, and reclaiming ownership of their land, their beautiful, dear land, and saying to those who usurped it, get lost, get out of here. And that's the only way that they will, as it were, educate each other. We all need to educate each other. You know, I don't know everything. Every time I talk to somebody, I learn something new and I put a different place. I use this metaphor of the dry stone wall, you know, that when you're trying to figure out what's going on, you know, it's like building a dry stone wall where all the stones are different sizes and shapes, and only one stone might fit the gap you have at that particular moment, and you have to find that stone, and you try multiples and they don't work, and then finally click, it happens. And I think that that's what we need to do for each other, to help each other make those connections, you know. But it's very interesting, you see, that they're onto that already. I haven't really been able to speak in Ireland publicly for over 10 years. Because any time I have, it's been the meeting would either be cancelled by virtue of threats to the venue, or it will be attacked on the night by goons, LGBT goons or Antifa goons or whatever whatever they would call it. They're all the same. They're just the regime's goons. They're under different flags and labels. And you know, and equally with my book now, I mean, I can't. You know, it's pointless me trying to get it into bookshops, because the last book I had, Give Us Back the Bad Roads, was basically shadow banned by the distributors and by most bookshops. You know, and people were abused who went into certain shops looking for it because they were primed by the social justice warriors to basically don't allow this book to be sold. So this is our democratic society, that the democratic values that Micheál Martin keeps bleating about. These are the values that he stands for, really, and that he is prepared to live with because they suit him. We live in a country which has essentially been occupied again, in my opinion, by a coup, which is, you know, the people in office are really only administrators. They're carrying out the orders of external people who want, essentially, as I say, vacant possession of our country because they believe they own it. They believe they own it lock, stock and barrel because they have won it in bets on the stock exchange for the last 50 years. And that's true of every country, you see, in the world. This is all in my book as well, about money and what happened to money and why it is, for example, Rick, that, you know, there's no money in Ireland still. I mean, there never was money for things in Ireland growing up, for potholes or hospitals or anything. But suddenly in the last few years, there's loads of money for other things, for IPAS centres and for destruction.
NGOs,
you know,
6 billion a year for NGOs alone.
Yeah, for cycle lanes, for example. You know, all these kind of things. There's loads of money, but there's still no money for potholes. Have you noticed that?
I have noticed that. In
You know,
fact, if I go outside my house at the minute, our rates keep going up, 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 up.
yeah,
And
and
the
that,
only thing you could say that they pay for is the bin collections once a week. And even then, they have you segregating your own bloody rubbish. Now it's
yeah,
no, and then outside my street, they have the council's been round with a yellow paint spray can, and they've been spraying rectangles around all the potholes. So someone's going to come along in the next week or so and dump a little bit of tarmac in there. But yeah,
yeah.
I take your point about the
But
potholes.
but what this tells us is that there are actually two kinds of money. There's the old kind of money which is scarce, which is always scarce. That's the definition of money. Money is a scarce commodity because it reflects the difficulty in doing things, in building things, in getting up out of bed in the morning and going to work. And it has to reflect that. That's why it was based on gold, which is a scarce commodity. But when they did away with that, then it became just pieces of paper. And that has enabled them to do the other kind of money, which is essentially money that can be used, just handed out left, right, and center to anybody,
Hmm.
millions, billions, no bother. And people will do stuff for it. Things will happen as a result of it, but they will be ideologically motivated and ultimately destructive.
They will.
And that's the thing people need to understand, that they're wrong. People are wrong when they say that's our tax money they're spending on migrants. It's not actually. This is fake money they're using
Printed
for that.
money.
Yeah.
Phone money.
Yeah, yes. It's so we're in this bizarre situation. This is why I wanted to write the book, because I've been thinking out all these things for the last 5 years and watching and trying and reading a lot about this, because there's lots of literature, lots of books, in the past about totalitarianism and propaganda and all that. And you won't hear it on RTE, you won't read it in the Irish Times.
You won't see it in the Late Late Show.
No,
I've another question for you. So, John Long, I think in a nutshell, the answer to your question, what can the average Mary and Tom do? Talk more, get out more,
yeah.
get amongst people more,
Op-
have
Open
conversations.
your hearts and your mouths.
Open your heart and your mouth. Beautiful. Okay, I have another question for you. These are coming in at tangents, really. So this one's from Firmsy. Firmsy said, "Hi Rick, if you could ask John, what does he think of boycotting anyone involved in the destruction of our country, refusing goods and services, and also socially within the community?" Love the show, from Firmsy. So I think that's in relation to, for example, a lot of people are profiteering off of the back of, say, the destruction of Carrickmacross, for example, the destruction of Letterkenny, of Bundoran, all these places that we're seeing, all these protests popping up. There's a lot of men making a lot of money off of the back of it. And one of the things that's being called for now is boycott their businesses, shun them as social pariahs, whatever. What's your opinion on
No,
boycotting as
I,
a method of how
I
would you
think
say?
I think I think that's a given. I don't think that people should support in any way or even tolerate the presence of people who are destroying their country. This is their homeland. This is their children's homeland. This is the only place in the world that any of us has to call home.
Mhm.
And once it's gone forever. And that means we are people roaming the world looking for a place to put our head down. That's what it means.
Yeah.
So, it's the least we need to be doing is what that this gentleman has proposed.
So boycotting most definitely would get the thumbs up from you in terms of a
Yes,
legitimate, non-violent weapon that could be used to
yes,
counter the assault that these people are levying on their own communities by closing hotels, opening them, kicking tenants out in many cases to get a
yes.
better contract
Let
from the
let
government.
them know. I mean, look there, Rick. I've been a pariah in Ireland for the last decade for speaking the truth. Why don't we treat these guys as pariahs for doing
Yeah,
what they're doing? Wouldn't that
yeah,
be a better use of our energies?
it would. It would. So, Firmsy, yes, is the answer to that
Yes.
question. Okay, we've got another question from Roscoe here. Roscoe said, "Do you guys think there is a political solution to save," he says, "the Irish slash white race?" Great show. Keep up the good work. I think this is actually a guy from Scotland. So Roscoe says, "Is there a political solution somewhere in all of this? Maybe not right now at this particular time, but is there a political solution to get things back to the way they used to be, to stop the meat
Oh,
cleaver from severing
oh,
the wires?"
yes, yes, there is. I mean, and first of all, I mean, to be clear, ultimately, I've always said it has to be a political solution in the sense that whoever is going to save our country in the longer term and take it, put their feet under the desks of power, they will have to win elections, and that so that there's no question about that. And we've had some little mishaps and experiments and mishaps and so on. We've learned, we've educational experiences, but we need to start thinking them through and working on them. But ultimately, there has to be a political solution to it, and I believe there can be, because there are certain clear obstacles that you can see in front of you. There's the corruption of the political system. There's the buying of voices, the buying of silence, the buying of agencies, of institutions, the buying of judges, the buying of police force, the buying of journalists, and that needs to stop. But I come back again to what I said in the other answer: conversation. None of this can be done without conversation. Conversation is the cornerstone of democracy, because without being able to speak to each other truthfully and openly, we can't understand what's happening, and therefore we can't do the right thing about it. We can't work out what is the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. But I believe that if we do that, if we could take our courage in our hands, all of us, or there's enough of us to make a difference, we could actually say to these guys, we would have these guys running for the hills, if not down the pier, and jumping in hoping for the best, that they might be able to swim over to Wales or somewhere. If we took our courage in our hands and said, "This is our country. You will not do this to us. You will not do it," and say to the guard who comes pulling his baton out as well, say, "You go home to your mother, you coward."
The next question I have is kind of linked into this one in a way. Willie M says, how do the street protests, or this renewed spat of protests that we're seeing now, that are very significant in my opinion, and looks like it's gathering momentum in my opinion, how do those street protests achieve positive political outcomes? So you're talking about a political solution. We don't have one right now, so we need a positive solution, political outcome from this. Are they linked together? Is this a precursor, or clearing the ground to allow some positive political outcome to come?
Yeah. Well, look, okay. Well, certainly a large number of people on the street in a peaceful manner, taking on the state and challenging. That's very powerful, because one of the big problems we have in our culture is that because of the wash of propaganda, the incessant wash, everybody in a certain sense, to some extent, or most people to some extent, is of the view that the thoughts in their heads are theirs only. Mm-hmm. That nobody else really, or very few people think like this. And they're afraid to say it out themselves. But the problem is everybody else is afraid to say it out as well. I mean, somebody told me there was a particular town, and they were planning a centre in an old folks' home, and nobody was really seemed to be interested. The local people said, "Oh, we're not racist, blah blah." And then there was a local post woman who, going around to all the houses and talking to people, realised that every single household was agitated about this, but they weren't talking to each other. Mm-hmm. And she actually organised a meeting and invited them all to come. And everybody went expecting nobody else to be there, but everybody was there.
Yeah.
You see?
Yes.
And this is the benefit of the march, in a slightly different context. That it advertises the urgency and the feeling and the emotion and the horror of the people, which has been silenced by corrupt media. Mm-hmm. And that's vitally important. It's not that I'll just say two other things about mm-hmm. protests, which are, there are dangers. Number one, I mean, it would be, I think, wrong to expect that a march in itself will have any effect on power. Yes. That's not, except that they will see the people waking up to it. But there's also the danger, and one of the big dangers over the last few years that I was certainly, because I avoided this kind of protest thing, because I saw that people like the corrupt Garda commissioner that we had here for that period would use a situation like that to send these men in to batter people, to create friction and create tension. There would be a counter protest by some lefty scumbags, you know,
Mhm.
and they would be getting a guard of honor into the middle and be protected. I saw this myself in an election back in 2020, even before this whole period began, where you had so-called Antifa, Rintifa, 20
Mhm.
quid a head for the night, you know, that was it, and masked up scars around their faces, working hand in glove. Again, the
Mhm.
Orwellian fist in the
Mhm.
Huxleyan glove with
Mhm.
on Garda Síochána, the guardians of the peace. So, you know, this is the reality. The state, in a certain sense, like people to protest, but I think that I'm very encouraged. Something's happened, and I haven't put my finger on it. I think the state is getting scared now that somehow what's actually happening is they're no longer able to whip up a counter protest in the way they were 3 or 4 years ago,
Mhm.
and they're getting scared by that they're now on the point of critical mass, and the people are about to break out
Yeah.
as one
Yeah.
and say enough.
I, you've hit the nail on the head. People that some people are very, very critical, saying, "What's the point? What's the point in getting 50,000 people to walk from the Garden of Remembrance down O'Connell Street? The government aren't going to listen. They're not going to do anything." No, nobody in their right mind would expect a march through Dublin would automatically reverse Mayhole Martin's mindset, Simon Harris's mindset, whoever else's mindset. That's not going to do that. But what it most definitely does is this. I think it energizes people and gives them that sense that they're not alone. And against the backdrop of your book, for example, where you talk about 5 years worth of people being beaten down and gaslit and fed a pseudo reality to the point where many people think that they're losing their mind. When you drop someone then all of a sudden into O'Connell Street on a sunny day with 50 to 100,000 like minded individuals all marching in unison for the same strength and purpose, maybe many people that attend these events are down and they're demoralized.
Well,
They look like you in that mirror or that portal that you're looking through. Do you get
yeah,
me? But
yeah,
when you
yeah.
come away from
Oh,
it, people are on a
oh,
high and they're saying, right, how can we bring this back to where we are? When's the next one? How do we build on the momentum for this?
okay.
How do
Yeah,
we unify?
yes. You see, this happened. This happened already. We have the prototype. The prototype type was Prague in November 1989, when something like a 500,000 to 1 million people streamed onto the streets of Prague and onto Winchester Square. And the leaders of the movement were on the balcony. And within hours, the government had resigned
Mm-hmm.
because they saw this is it, it's over. Now that's called Velvet Revolution. It's not the only time in history that has happened, but it's a rare event. I mean, people during the election last year when I was running for the European Parliament as an experiment and so on, uh, and an informative one, if not a successful one. But people were criticizing me for doing that. Say, "Oh, the system is corrupt. You're honoring the system by running an election." I said to them, "Well, okay, there are three ways we can take our country back, and there are three ways, and they all start with V. There's violent insurrection, there's velvet revolution, and there's voting. Now, as far as I'm concerned, violent insurrection is out. It's
Yes.
off the table. It's not an option as far as now. Voting, okay, at the moment, there's no point in voting because the system is corrupt.
Mhm.
But the middle one, velvet revolution, the protests can lead to that moment if they're handled properly and if you don't allow the police to manipulate them in the way they have done in the past. In the way, for example, they did back in November of 2023, when they basically brought a whole load of migrants onto the streets to create a riot and then blame the far right.
Since then, or since, even over the last 2 years, it just seems to be, and from asking people at some of these events and from watching other people speaking at these events, there is a real blanket sense that something is definitely happening. And it's not just another protest. It's not just another get together in Dublin or a get together in Cork. It seems to be at this particular point right now in May 2025. Some people have been saying, or have had them on record saying, I think we're going to look back on this time in the future and say we were part of history that brought about that velvet revolution. I think people are genuinely thinking this is the beginning of something that we don't know what it is right now. We can't
Yeah.
see it exactly right now, but when we look back on it, the feeling very generally is this is significant, and
I,
we'll know about it someday.
I think that's absolutely the case. I mean, I see now that, for example, even the people of my county town, Roscommon, are up in arms now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Lipa Centre. Like, I haven't spoken in Roscommon for a decade because the word is out that I'm a racist. But now people are beginning to understand. Oh, maybe he knew something we didn't see. You see, and this is the point that people are now. I mean, I'm not blaming people. You know, they're under a wash of propaganda, and I explain all this how it works in my book. Like, you know, I don't blame people, and I don't blame people. You know, poor people deserve our sympathy in these situations, like when they're beaten down and they're propagandized and they're bullied and they're threatened. You know, don't open your mouth or we'll do you. You know, and that's what was done. You know, that was the LGBT goons, the Antifa goons. That's what they do. You know, they did it to me in the streets. You know, and the guards stood by smirking. You know, because it was me. You see, so like that's fair enough. I understand people don't want John Waters around because trouble follows him. He's not trouble, but trouble follows him, and that's the problem. The state brings trouble after him. That's the answer. That's what actually happens.
Mm.
So, and but I'm staying here. I'm staying here. I've produced my book now. I'm going to do more, and I think that I don't have any resentment against anybody. I don't have any resentment against anybody in the movement. I support everybody who's doing the right thing. I just wish people would focus more and put aside their grievances with each other and their differences of opinion and try to mobilize. Because you're right. I think this could be it.
Mhm.
This could be the moment when that magical energy enters in
Yeah.
and we could actually reclaim. And remember, you see, I think there's a deep pessimism in people, certainly in the resistance now. And I picked this up over the last year. A pessimism based on the idea that we deal with a superhuman force,
Mhm.
that we deal with a kind of an omnipotent, omniscient entity of some kind, the cabal or whatever it would be. I call them the combine. They're not omniscient and they're not omnipotent. That at all times they need the people to accept. That's how they did it. They got the people to accept in the COVID period their dominion. If the people refuse them this time, if they say no, withdraw their
Mhm.
obedience, withdraw their allegiance to this corrupt government and its minions, stop buying the Irish Times, stop buying the Irish Independent, close, take your television out, take it, grab it by the scruff of the neck and throw it in the nearest skip. Then we will have a chance of taking our country back. There is nothing on RTE that you need to know.
No,
It's
there's
all
not.
lies and useless drivel.
There's another omni there. You mentioned omniscient and you mentioned omnipotent, all knowing and all powerful. Okay, there's another omni there that they are not, which is omnipresent,
Mm.
right? So they only have a finite amount of physical resources compared to, for example, the population of whatever country, whoever members of whoever said cabal are trying to manipulate. It's always a small amount of people exerting a huge amount of control over a huge amount of people. If
That's
those
right.
people, if the penny drops, John, then hang on a minute. Let's say, for example, everybody got raided tomorrow morning and we were all dragged to prison for what we've been saying and thinking. They don't have the capacity to lock everybody up. They don't have the manpower to make all those arrests. I was
That's
speaking to a Garda last week. I don't know if you know him or not, a brilliant guy called John Wilson. And I
yes.
just
I
bumped into
saw it.
him because he happened to be in Carrickmacross. But
Great
this is
man.
what he said. He said, listen, there's about 13,000 guards in Ireland at the minute. He says they're policing by consent. The public are agreeing to them policing the public. He said, what would they do? Not that he was suggesting it, but he said, what would they do? if 600,000, a million people decided not to play ball with whatever was being thrust upon them, there's 13,000 of them. What would they do if they could lock up, if they could arrest a million Irish people, John? Where are you going to put
Yes.
them?
You
Where are you
see,
going to put them?
this is the point, Rick. You see, fear.
Mhm.
Fear is real in the sense that it's real in your heart and in your head when you think about the options facing you in any given situation. But one of the things I've learned about this is that if you get your priorities right in your head and say, okay, what is worth fighting for here? What is worth it? And what will be the consequences of losing that which is worth something to me? Say in this case, my country. It could be something else. It could be a marriage. It could be a child. It could be something else. But in this case, it's a country. What could be worse than losing your country? What can they do to you that will be worse than what will happen to you and your family if you lose your country?
Mhm.
If it's invaded by hostile aliens who will tell you, shut up and listen, or else we'll plug you. That's where we're going. That's where we're going. We're allowing our enemies into our country, and there's no other way of interpreting it. And there's nothing else that can happen other than the destruction of the indigenous population, because that's what always happens.
And
Right?
as the saying goes, if you're going to die, die with your boots on.
That's right.
Or to
And
quote Neil Young, which I don't like to do, considering he's gone woke, it's better to burn out than to fade
no,
away. Is it
no.
not?
Well, he wrote some great songs. He
He
did.
did.
Yeah. But now you see, there's a thing that happens in a culture like this, and I talk about this in the book as well, where things get normalized. There's a sense in like everything is as it was, no problem. Everything is hunky dory. When you read your Irish Times, everything is in the same place as it was yesterday. Yeah, but it's not like that. And you see, that's where the fear comes from. Really, the fear comes from the indecision that comes from being unable to make the choice to do and say what you need to do and say, because you still have something to lose. The moment when you actually are free of that is when you realize, I have nothing to lose. I have nothing to lose but my fear. Because that's where the fear comes from. You think, well, if I hang in for another 6 months, I'll get the money, a bit more money in the bank, and we'll be sound then, better anyway. But then you see you miss the opportunity. People need to understand this is critical. This is going nowhere good. This is going to the terminus. That's where it's going.
Mhm.
The end of Ireland, the end of history, the end of everything that we love and cherish. That's what's happening. That's what these bastards are doing. Make no mistake. Don't look at their stupid grinning faces and think that they're the same guys that was here before. They've been here for years. We know Micheál well, sure, and the grand fella. Bit of an Egypt, but like, they need to cop on and understand this. Whether these guys know what they're doing or not, I don't know. I hope they don't know what they're doing, because I know what they're doing. They're destroying the very fabric of our civilization and our beautiful country. And we need to stop them before it's too late. And the way to do it is to stop everything now and say, I don't care what they do to me. You can do what you like. And if 3 million Irish people stand up and do that, these guys will be running for the hills.
They'll be finished.
Yeah.
It's just as simple as that. But it's getting that into people's heads. But I think, again, that's what I believe the role that these progressively larger, more frequent, more diverse street protests are doing. It's energizing people. It's making people look over their shoulder and go, I'm
Yes.
not alone. I'm not
Undoubtedly.
on my own here. There's not just a dozen or 2 dozen or a couple of hundred people with the same mindset. There's 50 to 100K on any one given day. Go to Carrickmacross, there's 1,000 people in a small village. I don't know if you saw what happened in Bundoran last week, Letterkenny as well. There's a huge protest planned in Cork on the
Yes,
7th, which is going to be big, and then another one in Dublin on the
that's right. And
22nd.
now it has a sense of being nationwide.
Yes,
It was
yes.
Dublin for a long time, or Cork and Dublin, but now it's nationwide, everywhere. People, Roscommon, come on.
Mhm.
The Rossies are on
The
the field,
Rossies are on the move.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's good. That's good.
That's a good indicator. Let's take it as a great indicator. Another question, if you can. Let's see. Let's go with this one. Does he, John, believe Ireland will survive as a country retaining its Christian values and Celtic culture?
Well, I mean, this is what I mean by the end of history.
Mhm.
Uh, You know, we won't unless,
Unless.
And unless we do something to do that, to maintain that, first of all, we focus on the value that all of those things have for us. And then that we start to think, to get together and say, well, what are we going to do to stop these bastards?
Yeah. So the answer to that question, I think, is it's possible, but it's not a given if people
No.
don't mobilize and come together in
Yes. Oh,
unity.
yeah. It's still possible.
Possible.
We'll need we'll need a blessing, so we'll need luck, but it's possible that we'll do it. We may not have the intact country we had. We won't get back to what we had, but we might salvage it yet.
Do you know what it reminds me of? I don't know why, but I'm thinking when I talk to people, sometimes you get these analogies from movies, right? And at the end of the first Star Wars movie, you know, the very first one that was made, A New Hope, the Death Star needs to be destroyed, right? The Death Star is this big, massive thing that can destroy planets, and it looks like
Yes.
it's going to be impossible to take it out. So they send in a little fleet, 3 of those X-Wing fighters, and Luke Skywalker's there with a droid, and Obi-Wan Kenobi's talking in his ear, and the first one gets knocked out by Darth Vader, and the second one fires the torpedoes. They don't go down the hole. It's all on Luke Skywalker. The odds are stacked against him, but he lets rip. The voice comes in his head, use the force, Luke. Next thing, those photon torpedoes go down and up he goes, and boom, bang goes the Death Star. Highly unlikely that it would succeed, but very probable that it could. So we'll have to retain some form of
Well, you
optimism there.
see,
We can take out the Death Star.
yeah, you see, I'm ultimately, I'm skeptical in some respects. I'm pessimistic in some respects, but overall, I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
For the reason that humans have a desire to survive. All humans, all peoples, and when they come to the point of extinction, they start to fight back. Then, now, I just would like us not to leave it until the last minute.
No, no. Don't leave it until you're the last X-Wing heading down the Death Star's valleys with Darth Vader on your tail. Don't let it get that far,
That's
Ireland.
right.
I think that's
That's
the
right.
message of the day.
Yeah, we don't need the cliffhanger. We don't
don't-
need the cliffhanger ending. It's not a movie.
We don't want that. And we don't
No.
want to come back for Empire Strikes Back, Return of the
No.
Jedi, The Revenge
No.
of the Sith,
This
The
is the
Phantom
last.
Menace.
This
No,
is the last movie.
it's it.
This is the last movie of the Irish struggle for itself.
It is. One last question. One more. Kiki and Jasmine writes, could you ask John, how does he feel about his fellow journalists' betrayal of the Irish people, some of which would have been colleagues in the past?
Oh, well, I mean, I think that journalists have committed the greatest crime. There's no getting away from it. There's no going back. There's no point in saying other than that that's what's happened. And I think it's shameful. It's the most shameful thing that's ever happened, in my view, because we are the sentries. Journalists are the sentries. I've said this before, Rick. When you're in a walled town, and you're the elders, and the dusk is falling, and you look out and you see shapes up in the turrets, up in the lookout points, and you say everything's well. We can sleep easy. Our children can sleep easy. The marauders will not get to us.
Mm-hmm.
And then you realize afterwards that these were fake. These were straw men in the lookout places. That the sentries had departed to the town.
Traitors. There were traitors.
They gone on the piss down the local village, down the local city, and gone to discos and all that. That's basically what journalism has done, and it's unforgivable. And it's the greatest crime of all, because the other crimes would not have been possible if journalists had not done that. That's I keep saying that. I'll say it again. It's the most abominable crime of all. Is the crime that journalists committed by lying and by taking money for lying.
Amen. Well, I suppose we'll finish it on a positive note also. Despite their Judas-esque behavior, selling it all for a few pieces of silver, betraying the people that they have a responsibility to report to, and the government and NGOs, and on and on and on and on it goes. The good news is that they don't have the stranglehold on information. They do not have the stranglehold on the dissemination of thoughts and opinions, like, for example, we're doing today. I want to believe it's going to get out to an audience, Not a
Yeah.
small audience, not a humongous audience, but it's going to get out to a lot of people. And then they can spread that to other people who can spread that to other people. So I think also while we still can, and again, check the description box, please, if you're listening to this. Underneath, there'll be a link through to John's Substack page. There'll be a link through to John's YouTube channel that he's uploading his own content onto as well. Scholar Gypsies, I think it's called. Is that
Scholar
correct?
Gypsy with
Scholar
Jerry,
Gypsies with Jerry
Jerry O'Neill.
Jerry
Yes.
O'Neill. So check that one out as well. And a link through to this book, this tome that I would encourage anyone out there to go and read. And, you know, I'm going to say it's not too early to be looking for Christmas presents. And so help the war effort out. Get yourself a copy or two of The Abolition of Reality, a first draft of The End of History by the one and only John Waters, and show some love and support for him if you can. And on that, I think we're going to end it. So big thanks to you, John. Always a pleasure, never a pain.
Thank you very much, Rick. Thanks, and hello, goodbye to everybody.
Hello and goodbye. Yes, indeed. I'm a little bit after this conversation too, but in a good way. I'm a bit exasperated in a good way. So, listeners, you know what to do. Share the content, leave your thoughts, comments, and opinions below. And for now, I'm Rick Munn, No Risk, No Reward Media, over and out.